Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I could feel it the moment I stepped into the living room, his gaze on me, heavy and deliberate, even though the TV flickered on and off like a careless spectator in the background. My husband slept peacefully on the couch, unaware, leaving the room charged with a tension I couldn't ignore. Every small movement I made, the brush of my hair from my shoulder, the quiet shift of my weight, seemed magnified under his watchful eyes. I caught him glancing up, our eyes locking for just a fraction too long, a playful smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was like he knew exactly how dangerous the silence between us had become. My pulse jumped, and I could hear the rapid thrum echoing in my ears. A shiver ran down my spine when he shifted slightly, just close enough to make me aware of his presence without a word. I tried to distract myself, reaching for my mug on the side table, but his movement mirrored mine. When I stood to head to the kitchen, he followed, smooth, unhurried, like he had rehearsed this exact moment. The faint scrape of his shoes against the hardwood floor sent a small shock through me. I glanced over my shoulder, his gaze was magnetic, teasing, a silent challenge that made my heart hammer in my chest. For a moment, we walked in a quiet rhythm, the kitchen lights casting long shadows across the walls, and every step felt loaded, as if we were both acutely aware of rules just waiting to be broken. My fingers trembled slightly as I set down my cup, and I sensed him standing just a little closer than necessary. The air between us was thick, electric, a charged silence that promised more than either of us dared say aloud. And then, just as I turned to grab the milk from the fridge, I felt it, an unexpected proximity, a magnetic pull that made it impossible to think clearly. My heartbeat caught, my breath hitched, and I realized I wasn't sure who was leading, or if we were both already on the edge of crossing a line we'd never return from. Ever since I'd married my husband, I'd known that life wouldn't be as simple as a quiet, predictable home. He was gentle, reliable, the kind of man people leaned on. But somewhere beneath the surface of our marriage, there were unspoken gaps, small fissures that grew over time. Nights filled with quiet sighs and unanswered questions, mornings where I felt more like a roommate than a partner. These moments built walls I didn't always notice until they pressed against me. And then there was him, my stepson. He was bold, perceptive, and, I'd come to realize, frighteningly intuitive. The way he looked at me wasn't like anyone else. There was something almost magnetic about it, a spark that made me question boundaries I'd always considered untouchable. At first, I brushed it off. After all, I knew better, but the tension between us had a subtle, persistent rhythm. It was in the way he laughed at my jokes just a little too long, how he mirrored my movements like we were in some silent, intimate dance. That night, as I moved through the kitchen, the memory of past evenings pressed against me. Even small touches in passing, his hand brushing mine when he handed me a cup, the shared laughter over trivial jokes, carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. My heart beat faster at the thought of him noticing every shift in my mood, every tiny hesitation. I couldn't help but feel alive in a way that had been absent for months, maybe years. Yet, beneath the attraction, there was guilt. I loved my husband, I wanted our marriage to thrive. But desire doesn't always respect logic, and the tension between us was undeniable. It wasn't just physical, it was the unspoken acknowledgement of everything we weren't supposed to explore. Each glance, each charged silence, brought a mix of excitement and fear, a delicate balancing act between what I wanted and what I knew was right. We stood there in the kitchen, a quiet rhythm surrounding us. The hum of the refrigerator, the muted city lights filtering through the window, even the faint tick of the wall clock, all seemed amplified in the charged silence. I could feel the subtle pull of his gaze, the unvoiced words lingering between us, the dangerous curiosity that neither of us dared to voice aloud. And yet, despite every warning, there was a magnetic connection that refused to let me look away. A part of me wanted to step back, to remind myself of boundaries. But another part, the part that had lain dormant for too long, thrived on the tension, the closeness, the forbidden allure of someone who seemed to see straight through me. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening, unsure of who would make the first move, or if we were already past the point where it mattered. I could feel it in the small shift of the room, the almost imperceptible change in the air. My husband stirred in his sleep on the couch, his steady breathing filling the silence, completely unaware of the charged energy that had taken over the space. And then there was him, standing closer than before, his gaze fixed on me in a way that made my pulse race and my thoughts scatter. A teasing smirk played on his lips, and I caught the faintest glint of mischief in his eyes, the kind that both thrilled and terrified me. I wanted to look away, to retreat to the safety of routine, yet I couldn't. Every subtle movement, the way he leaned slightly, the brush of his hand against the counter as he mirrored my gestures, made it impossible to deny the electricity between us. Jealousy stirred unexpectedly, sharp and confusing. I realized that I craved his attention, this magnetic pull, even though I knew it was dangerous. The thought made my chest tighten and my stomach flutter with something I wasn't entirely ready to name. At the same time, I hated how much power he seemed to hold over me, how effortlessly he could make me feel both cautious and reckless with a single glance. We moved through the kitchen in a delicate, silent rhythm. Every small gesture, the clink of a cup, the rustle of fabric as I shifted, felt loaded, charged with unspoken longing. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for the salt, and he followed, close enough that the warmth of his presence brushed against me. The tension between us was palpable, a delicious strain of temptation and restraint, teasing the edge of what was allowed and what was forbidden. And then there was the quiet, almost audacious challenge in his eyes, the unspoken question hanging in the air: how far would I let this go? My heart thumped in my chest, my breath catching at the intensity of the moment. Every instinct screamed caution, yet another part of me, the part that had lain dormant, thrived on the closeness, on the thrill of feeling desired, of wanting something that wasn't mine to have. I froze for a heartbeat, torn between retreat and surrender, my mind racing with possibilities. And in that charged pause, I knew that we were teetering on the edge of a line neither of us was supposed to cross, yet neither could deny the pull drawing us ever closer. The house felt impossibly quiet, as if every sound had been swallowed by the tension between us. My husband had dozed off completely, leaving the living room and kitchen in a muted, sleepy haze. I could feel his presence behind me, watchful, deliberate, and closer than ever, yet no one else noticed. Every step I took, every breath I drew, seemed magnified by the unspoken energy crackling in the space between us. He lingered just a little too near, leaning casually against the counter while I rinsed the glass in my hands. I could feel the warmth radiating off him, subtle but undeniable. The room seemed smaller, charged, like the air itself had thickened. I tried to focus on mundane tasks, checking the fridge, moving a dish, but each movement only made our proximity more noticeable. The electricity in the silence hummed, a magnetic pull neither of us could resist, yet both of us dared not voice aloud. A faint laugh escaped me as he leaned slightly, almost brushing my arm. I jumped at the contact, heart hammering, cheeks warming. His eyes caught mine, playful and bold, as if he could see every thought I tried to hide. There was no touch beyond that whisper of closeness, yet the simple brush of air and shared glance was enough to make the room spin around me. My thoughts raced, desire tangled with guilt, curiosity mixed with fear. I knew this was dangerous, yet there was a thrill in the risk, a magnetic pull that drew me closer with every heartbeat. Each subtle gesture, the tilt of his head, the way he mirrored my movements, the way he held my gaze a second too long, made it impossible to ignore what was building between us. And then, just as I reached for a glass on the top shelf, he stepped forward, closing the tiny distance between us. The room seemed to shrink even further, shadows dancing around our faces, our breaths synchronizing in the quiet. I felt a rush of anticipation, the sharp edge of temptation, as if we were both acutely aware that something was about to happen, something neither of us could control. I froze, caught in the moment, my heart racing, unsure who would break the silence first. And then, the faint sound of the front door creaking open. The creak of the front door had jolted me out of my spiraling thoughts. I spun around, my heart hammering, and froze. My husband was standing there, phone in hand, brows furrowed in confusion and something else I couldn't immediately place: hurt? Suspicion? I swallowed hard, my pulse threatening to drown out my rational thoughts. For a moment, the kitchen felt impossibly small, every glance and unspoken word amplified. He hadn't seen us yet, but the intensity in the room had shifted. The closeness I had felt moments ago was suddenly a fragile thread stretched taut by the risk of discovery. His eyes darted between us, lingering on our proximity, and I realized how unmistakable the tension must have seemed from the doorway. A lump formed in my throat. I could almost hear the unspoken questions he hadn't voiced, the way his gaze demanded answers. Then he spoke, voice low but firm. "What's going on here?" I hesitated, torn between hiding the truth and the need to be honest. He had caught more than just a moment of charged proximity, he had caught the underlying emotions we'd been trying to ignore for weeks. My stepson's gaze flicked to mine, uncertainty and something unreadable in his eyes. I felt the same turmoil reflected there, desire, guilt, curiosity, all colliding in a single, impossible instant. I started, the words catching on my tongue, unable to form a lie that felt plausible. The room was silent, thick with anticipation, the kind that makes every second feel like an eternity. And then, the unexpected twist hit. My husband laughed, soft, incredulous, but not angry. "I see," he said, shaking his head slightly, a smile tugging at his lips. "You two are closer than I thought." Shock froze me in place. Closer? Not in the way anyone feared, but emotionally, undeniably, in ways I hadn't admitted even to myself. All the hidden glances, the small, playful interactions, they hadn't been just tension. They were a reflection of unspoken truths, of desires for connection and understanding that had nothing to do with betrayal in the way we feared. My stepson exhaled, visibly relieved yet still tense, the room's charged energy shifting into something lighter, though still intense. My husband stepped forward, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. "We need to talk. All of us. About what's been simmering under the surface." And in that moment, I realized how fragile and powerful honesty could be. We were teetering on the edge of something raw, risky, and real, not just desire, but the emotional truths we had hidden from each other. The kitchen, once a space of temptation, now felt like the threshold of revelation, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. The silence hung heavily over the kitchen, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears as we all stood there, 3 lives intersecting in ways none of us had anticipated. My husband's gaze was steady, calm, but there was a steel beneath it, an unspoken understanding that the moment demanded honesty. "I want to know everything," he said, voice measured but firm. "No more half-truths." I took a deep breath, summoning the courage I hadn't known I possessed. I told him about the tension I'd felt, the unspoken attraction, the curiosity that had grown over weeks into something that terrified and exhilarated me at once. I spoke honestly, without excuses, hoping he could understand the complexity of my feelings. My stepson listened quietly, guilt and relief mixing on his face, as though finally admitting the truth had lifted a weight he had carried alone. I could see the same tension I'd felt mirrored in his eyes, the desire to connect, the fear of crossing a line, and the anxiety over the consequences of our emotions. My husband's jaw tightened for a moment, and I braced myself for anger. But instead, he let out a long breath and nodded. "I'm not blind," he admitted. "I've noticed the closeness between you two, and I think it's time we faced it head-on rather than letting it fester." The words stunned me. Not in shock, but in relief that the truth was finally out, that the tension didn't have to simmer in secrecy any longer. There were no accusations, no judgments, only a raw, honest confrontation that made the room feel impossibly alive with emotion. We talked for hours, sorting through our feelings, our boundaries, and the parts of ourselves we hadn't dared to admit before. Each revelation was a small earthquake, shaking the foundation of what we thought we knew about our family, about ourselves. And yet, with each confession, the weight on our shoulders lifted, leaving space for understanding and connection. By the end of the night, the atmosphere had shifted from tense and dangerous to charged with possibility. We had faced the consequences of our choices, embraced the emotional truths we had hidden, and emerged with a clearer understanding of each other. As I glanced at my stepson, there was still a spark there, curiosity, warmth, and a sense of connection, but it was tempered now with respect and clarity. And as I looked at my husband, I saw patience, strength, and the promise that, while boundaries remained, the heart could still find space to grow, even in the most complicated situations. The kitchen, once a stage for tension and forbidden temptation, now felt like the place where honesty had transformed everything. We had survived the storm of emotions, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a cautious optimism, maybe even the beginnings of something new, unspoken, and real. The tension that had gripped the house for weeks finally began to dissolve, replaced by something softer, warmer, and infinitely more reassuring. We had confronted our truths, faced the intensity of our emotions, and emerged not broken, but stronger, more aware of what truly mattered. That evening, the kitchen, once a stage for temptation and uncertainty, felt like a sanctuary. My husband stood beside me, his hand brushing gently against mine as we washed the dishes together. There was a quiet intimacy in the mundane, a reminder that closeness wasn't always loud or dramatic. It could be found in shared moments, in laughter over spilled water, in the way someone waits patiently while you tie your apron. My stepson lingered nearby, helping quietly, his presence no longer charged with unspoken tension, but with a respectful warmth that made the bond between us feel genuine rather than dangerous. The way he smiled at me, soft and unguarded, reminded me that connection didn't have to cross lines to be meaningful. As I glanced at my husband, our eyes met, and a simple look conveyed more than words ever could: love, trust, forgiveness, and understanding. I felt the weight of the past weeks lift, replaced with the certainty that honesty had forged a stronger, more resilient bond between us. The intensity of temptation had transformed into appreciation, affection, and a deep emotional closeness that made the room feel light and safe. Later, as we sat together on the couch, wrapped in a quiet warmth, the city lights casting a soft glow through the window, I realized that love could survive tension, curiosity, and even fear. We had faced the edge of what could have been chaos, but we had chosen connection, transparency, and patience. For a fleeting moment, I closed my eyes and leaned back into the comfort of their presence, feeling the simple, profound joy of being understood, accepted, and loved. There were no dramatic declarations, no fiery confrontations, just the serene, unshakable feeling of hearts aligned. And as the evening faded into night, the three of us sharing quiet laughter and knowing glances, I understood that romance wasn't always about stolen glances or dangerous tension. Sometimes it was found in the safe, steady warmth of shared honesty, mutual respect, and the reassurance that, no matter the trials, love could grow even in the most complicated situations. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly at peace, and the house that had once been a stage for temptation was now a home for connection, care, and lasting affection.